Hello everyone, today we have a shift in the meta with the over-the-air patch, one of the highest consistency decks of the High Evolutionary Control, and with it impacting Bounce Archetype quite substantially, we have a pretty decent shift in the meta. It's almost like all of the other decks are now needing to meet the benchmark that is some of our more consistent decks. And so that is what we're running today, is one of those consistent decks. I consider this one you have to be this tall to ride the ride type of deck. If you can't beat the average power output of an Apocalypse discard deck, then it's never going to be substantial in the meta. And right now there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of shifts, people trying to figure out what is going to work well and what is ultimately going to be at the top of the meta. So while that is happening, it's always nice if you can't figure out anything else to run, go back to a comfort list, something that always does a decent amount of power. It is always a viable deck to run. It's never absolutely overpowered where it just can't be beaten, but it's never so inconsistent that it just can't be run. It's really hard to counter, and so if the opponent can't put a lot of power out on the board, then you're going to be able to steal those wins a lot of the time. And so in this version that we're running today of the Apocalypse discard, we did take out Storm because we are still seeing a pretty heavy control meta. We wanted to take out the Storm to avoid those double Storm into like a Spider-Man lock, Professor X type of games where we just can't play anything on the last turn. And so we dropped the Storm, we added in Hellcow as that kind of consistency driver to make sure that we always have those discard engines. But if you see a drop off of control, a Storm into a Dracula is so incredibly tough to compete against, even if you're a High Evolutionary deck. If they drop a Cyclops there, Dracula doesn't necessarily care about Cyclops all that much. And so overall, this list is kind of tried and true. You could replace Nebula for a Sunspot, but I do like putting the scalability of that card in the opponent's hands. And so if you place it into a hard to play into location, then the opponent has to go out of their way to make sure that it's not going to become a nuisance. And by doing so, they're playing less efficiently, giving you a slight advantage. Rather than it being all on you skipping and floating your energy, you can kind of get that consistent power output all throughout the game. And then everything else is a pretty standard discard list. So we're going to go ahead and jump over into a couple of games. Thank you guys for being here, as always. Let's go ahead and jump on in. All right, so first up we have Bengali. The first location is Atlantis. We're going to go ahead and play the Nebula into the unrevealed location so that it most likely can scale freely for at least one turn. And then we do have the rest of our just standard discard cards. Now, the one change that you could make is dropping the Hellcow for the Storm. That is the much more like standard line. Hellcow allows us to more easily make sure that we have those discard components whenever we do need them. So I'm actually going to play the Swordmaster. A lot of times you opt to not, but right now, if it loses Lady Sif, that's fine. If it loses Hellcow, honestly, it's fine. If it discards Swarm, perfect. Hellcow, probably the one I wanted to get discarded the least out of all of them, but it's okay. Played Storm into the location that Nebula is in, which is either really odd, or if they have Killmonger, it makes quite a bit of sense. Or they can go wide. So they're running an Odin on reveal deck. We don't have a way to stop the Wong, unfortunately. So if they have Wong into Black Panther into Arnim Zola, there's nothing we can do about that. We also don't draw into our Apocalypse. And so the White Tiger does go off. It's going to fill up a lot of the space, unfortunately. 7 more here. A lot more here. I mean, if they do an Odin, I think we still win with this play, right? Like, we're getting an extra +1 in this lane. The Dracula absorbing the Chavez is going to overcome that amount of power. So that's one good thing with the White Tiger deck, is that it can get a really big reach. The bad thing is it doesn't always pump a lot of power into the Odin lane, and so that is a point of vulnerability if they have a decent amount of power elsewhere. We will take the 2 cubes. Playing that one heads up allowed us to win. We will take the 2 cubes. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Goose Fraba. The first location is the Machine World. We could either use that to fill up the opponent's hand intentionally if we get things like Swarm, but that's typically not great. It does look like they're running a Bounce style deck, or they're running Kitty Pryde, so it could be a few versions. A few versions of the Kitty Pryde deck are floating around. So now there is the Shuri Kitty Pride. There is the Control Kitty Pride, which is my personal favorite. The Spider-Man nerf does hurt it a tiny bit, but I still think it is viable just the way that it was, that I posted it a couple days ago. There is a link to that one. It's the Meta Breaker, if you want to see what deck I'm referring to. I'll leave it in the description below. We have our Lady Sif. We have our Hellcow to lean in on, and right now, that's going to hit good targets every single time. Unless we draw something like MODOK or Dracula, Hellcow is going to be our go-to for this upcoming turn. Because I don't think we're going to win the Asgard location, and maybe we do after we play the Hellcow there. Ooh, the Daredevil tells me that this is our control-heavy build, and so I'm not going to snap against them because we do know that they at least came across our deck list somewhere. But we are going to play the Hellcow. Get a double discard. It could do Wolverine, could do Swarm, Apocalypse. The only down or bad discard would be the Swordmaster here. Otherwise, we have all good potential outcomes. The Apocalypse comes down and the Swarm comes down, so we are 2 for 2 on that one. They do use Polaris, so they end up destroying our Nebula. But on this upcoming turn, they have a couple of things they could do. They could have Miles Morales. That is enabled by the Polaris moving our Nebula. They have the Kitty Pride. They could have Spider-Man, or they could have Professor X, or they just go with the Gamora for good raw value. I'm going to go MODOK into Hala. If they do Professor X into like Machine World, that's perfectly fine. I think we can outpower them in these other 2 locations. If they do Spider-Man into Machine World, that is kind of tough, but I think we can overcome them in the other 2 locations. They do Professor X into the Hala location. We do go first, so we have Wolverine that might give us that little bit of additional edge in the location to be able to win it. And since they have the Polaris, I doubt that they have Jeff. They could have cut Nightcrawler from my original list for Jeff, but if I was going to cut anything, it'd be the Polaris for the Jeff, so that you can have several consistent ways to enable your Miles Morales. So they do go with the lockdown in the Hala, I assume. We have the Wolverine come down in the left lane instead of the right lane. It is the Spider-Man. So right now they're ahead right now because of the extra power that he got from his nerf. So he went from a 4-3 to a 5-4. That little bit of extra power does allow them to keep the lead here. And if they have something like Gamora plus their Kitty Pride, we may not be able to beat them with the 2 swarms in Asgard. We're going to go ahead and try it. They were nice enough not to snap against us either. So we know the Gamora could be 12. I don't remember how many times Kitty Pride is bounced. It feels like maybe 3, so that's another 6. They would at the very least get very close to overcoming our power output in Asgard. Ooh. They also have a Shang-Chi. If they guess correct on the Shang-Chi, maybe they overpower us there too. They stack all into Machine World. Oh no. They got the read right, didn't they? They gave us the fist bump. I assume that's because they have... No, the Angela, Kitty Pride, and then Jeff. They did replace Nightcrawler for Jeff, I imagine. Now, a Shang-Chi could have absolutely derailed us here. Or had they stacked those cards here, they would have won by 1. It would have been very close, but they had the chance to. The reason I decided to drop our Apocalypse in the left lane was because this lane already had a 10 deficit or a 10 gap. So I assumed if they were going to go for trying to outpower one of the lanes, it would have been Machine World. Fortunately, we were able to hold that one down. I think we did get a little bit lucky. We will take the 2 cubes. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Damien. The first location is Savage Land, so that gets pretty clogged, pretty congested pretty quickly. They have some kind of Thanos list. We don't know what kind. We just see the Mind Stone, which is always a really good start for Thanos decks, because that allows them to draw into their stones, which is going to allow them to draw into their deck and draw into their other resources more consistently. We're going to go Morbius into the sewer system. I want to do that before we do our Calling Wing, so that we can guarantee that it's going to give us value rather than kind of just taking that 50-50 shot. They drop 2 cards, Space Stone, so they can move one of the Raptors out, potentially, to clear up additional space in the Savage Land. They also get their Soul Stone down. They're drawing resources. We have no idea what's actually in their deck outside of just their Thanos stones. And then the last location is Central Park, which just obliterates us. Oh, gosh. We can do Calling Wing. there's a chance that Wolverine bounces into the Savage Land and caps the location out. I would feel more comfortable if we had like Dracula there, so that they had an uncertain amount of power that they were having to compete against in the location. They do have Carnage, so they clear up their Savage Land. We can still overpower it with just the unknown amount of power presence that our Dracula is going to provide. Let's play there. Next turn, maybe a MODOK. Next turn, maybe we do like a Swordmaster and Calling Wing. Maybe we do the Hellcow, the Lady Sif. It depends on if we can draw into our big resource or not. But with both Swarm and Apocalypse, we don't necessarily care for Swarm here. Like we don't want the Swarm location. We don't want the Swarm because we're already pretty congested. They did use a players to try to force us into having this one capped out. Fortunately, we did play the Dracula, so that's not going to hit anything of value, but we also don't have anything of huge value in our hand. We're going to go Hellcow here. I think we lose this one. So they go Viper. We inherit the Space Stone, unfortunately. They could have a Hazmat, which would be devastating. At least we have the scaling power of Morbius here, like our only little bit of comfort. We're going to send it. We're going to assume that they maybe play away from the camp, or maybe they invest more heavily into it, depending on what they think we have left in our hand. But knowing that the highest power that could pull over there is 9, there's no way that that matches what they currently have, courtesy of their Carnage. We're going to throw some power into the other two locations, see if Morbius scaling from the discards is going to be enough. If Wolverine gets discarded, then that will bounce over into Central Park. We have a small chance there. It does get discarded, so it's going to bounce there. We're going to get a little bit of value. Not a lot, but maybe it will be enough. The Sentry comes down. We lose Sewer System by 1 until Dracula absorbs into the Swarm. We are able to swing that middle location by 1. The right lane we win by 3, even with the Soul Stone negatively impacting these cards. Not my proudest win, but we will absolutely take it. For having next to no board space, them running a kind of clutter or junk style deck, and us not having the big resource of Apocalypse, I'm really surprised we were able to pull that one out. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Cool Bird. The first location is the big house. So things like Swarm, Morbius, Nebula are going to be huge there. Kiln comes down. And so things like Morbius, Wolverine are going to be pretty big there. I'm going to go ahead and play our Morbius into Kiln. No, we're gonna draw into Dracula before the Kiln locks down. So we're just going to play Morbius into the big house to give us that fighting chance over there. Shuri's Lab is kind of wild. We do draw into Dracula, which is pretty big. Just going to skip here. Skip here, Dracula and Kiln on 4, and then everything else kind of gets shoveled into Shuri's Lab, depending on what they're running. With the Jeff, they could be running a lockdown. A lot of times, Jeff, in decks that run Jeff, you also see the Spider-Man, the Professor X lock, the Storm, which can be kind of scary. You also typically will see things like Cyclops or your Doctor Doom to be able to go wide. The good thing about Dracula is that Cyclops, Thing, any other negative affliction, it doesn't matter because it will offset once it absorbs into a card after the end of the game, so after turn 6. So we know that we're going to go ahead and snap into it. I've been playing really aggressive. I've been playing really passively to get to the end of games, but right now this one looks like it should be pretty solid, and that is why we've been playing pretty passively. We will take the 1 cube. The tentative play was going to be MODOK to get doubled. On turn 6, we were going to do something like Swarm, and then we could just do Chavez into Shuri's Lab. Or we could just let Chavez get absorbed by the Dracula. Even if they had Doctor Doom to go wide, it would have overpowered it potentially, depending on where Wolverine bounced to. So we will take the 1 cube. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Zab. The first location is Necrotia. With it afflicting our cards with -2, we'll probably avoid it for the most part. They are running a Thanos deck and start with Mind Stone, which is always the scariest way to face into a Thanos deck. It doesn't make it unwinnable, but it does make it quite a bit harder. Necrosha is actually now no problem with our Luke Cage if we end up playing that there. I'm going to go ahead and play our Morbius into Necrosha, and then we'll kind of play it by ear. So they have Soulstone in the hub, which is also going to be countered by the Luke Cage, which is pretty big. We have our MODOK, we have Apocalypse. We now know that they have the Evolved Hulk, so we want to try to be competitive in multiple lanes so that it makes it tough for them to do the Evolved Hulk and only the Evolved Hulk on the last turn. They play a Power Stone. They could be running counter cards, so they could run like a Leech, which would make our last turn very difficult to navigate. All right, so that we're not doing nothing on turn 4, I'm going to play Swordmaster. There's only one like really bad pull here, and that would be the MODOK. Ooh. Martage is big for us. We get Apocalypse, so we get the good high roll. Next turn, we're going to do a double trigger of MODOK. That's going to give us a lot of swarms. That's going to get our Wolverine on the board. We draw into Dracula just a touch too late, though. I do wish there was a way to get Dracula on board, but we're going to go ahead and snap into it. The double trigger of MODOK, I think, is too big to pass up. Even if they have a 20 power Evolved Hulk, I think we'll be perfectly fine. We do probably get the retreat now that Kamartaj is on the board. No, they stick it out. Okay, interesting. And so they could have some kind of lockdown, but with Morbius, it's going to be really hard to guarantee that anything gets locked, especially with all of these discarding twice. The MODOK is also a decent value at 8. Let's see. After the discards go through, let's see. The White Tiger. Okay, White Tiger is interesting. It could cap out the hub. It does. Caps out the hub. All we have to do is what? Our Apocalypse there? I'm going to do something like this. If they counteract our Luke Cage with Enchantress, then I want to have this lane covered by a little bit more than just the Apocalypse. If they do something like a Blue Marvel, I want to have it covered as well. Shang-Chi is going to take out the Morbius, but that's going to be all that it can reach to. So the Evolved Hulk is big, but it's not going to be big enough, I imagine. And I imagine that that's what they go with here. They got the White Tiger from the hub, and so they do play their Evolved Hulk. They win the right lane, but we win the other two. And so we will take the 4 cubes against the High Evolutionary Thanos list. I'm not sure what else they had in their deck. All that we saw from their deck was the Evolved Hulk and the stones. So we will take the 4 cubes, go ahead and jump over into one more. All right, next up we have Akusai. The first location is Westview. I have a Quinjet. You almost never see Quinjets anymore. So it could be a Moon Girl, like a Hit Nebula deck. It could be the Hawk deck, and they have a lot of ways to send like junk into our deck. So the Zabu could be the Hawk Dino, both of which were kind of tough for us to go into them. The bar with no name is unfortunate for them, though. We will smile as it happens. We have our Calling Wing, we have Hellcow, we have MODOK, we have Apocalypse. So we're going to be able to play a lot of swarms here. We're going to have the Breach of the MODOK. And I think it just, unless they have a way to change bar with no name, then we just really easily, I think, can focus on the other 2 locations, find a way to win. So it is the Moon Girl deck, like one of the only ones that I can think of that still runs the Quinjet. I think we're going to sacrifice our Lady Sif here. It's either that or we sacrifice a swarm, but that does lower the amount of swarms that we'll be able to get after MODOK triggers. I don't know that I want to do that. We're only losing 1 additional power. Lady Sif will discard and guarantee that it discards our Apocalypse. Next turn, MODOK is going to discard the rest of our hand. And I can't... Can you guys remember a time when discard did not have MODOK as a tool? Like, we had to use like Lockjaw to enable it, and just a lot of like quirky ways to make that play happen. So they have the Sentinel. They have... What else do they have here? The Agent Coulson. So it is probably like a Dino Hawk deck. And just the unfortunate bar with no name. I don't think they have a way to overcome that. And so then it comes down to us winning one of these other 2 lanes, which I think becomes too difficult. Unless for some reason they have like a Scarlet Witch, which I'm going to make their last turn play pretty tough to navigate. The double Devil Dino is going to be big, but we already have the win in the bar with no name. Have to win 1 additional. I'm gonna go play our Apocalypse here, and then we'll fill up the rest with swarms. Maybe they have a Hawk and a Mystique. Maybe they have a Mystique and then something else. We know that they have the Devil Dino that's 4 costs, so they could do the 4 cost. Ooh, a 4 cost and then a 2 cost Hawk, maybe? They do play 3 cards, so we'll see what they have here. I'm sure that they have a way to reload their hand. The Mystique is big. Let's see. The Rescue is big, but it is not big enough. They're going to get a little bit back in their Devil Dino in mid, but just not quite enough. The Machine World also helps out their Dino substantially because it makes sure their hand is 7. They got very unfortunate with the Bar with No Name location. I don't know if we would have won that one otherwise with them having the double Devil Dino. But we will gladly take the 4 cubes where we can. We're going to go ahead and end the video after that one. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.